Welcome back to the Rich Fritzky Show, and as ever, thanks for being with. I was the quintessential middle child. The oldest, Joan, was 6 years older than me, and the youngest, Marianne, 6 years younger. In between, two older brothers, Frank and Bob, to the north, and two younger, Jack and Bill, to the south. Today it is to brother number one, Frank, to whom I turn, to reflect upon our being there for each other, but more importantly, to his being there for me. As ever, time will not allow the all of it, just a limited and abbreviated highlights reel. Frank's lifelong quiet dignity never abandons, and he still flashes that brilliant smile of his from time to time, and given the endless love of his Holly, he remains fashionably dressed. But so very sadly, he has been struck by a damned horrific disease, one that is fierce, unforgiving, and unrelenting. As to my missive last week about mortification and humility and recognizing one's duty to others, know that Frank got that, lived that to the lees, and consequently gave ever so much more of himself than he took, leaving all of his love on the field. The oldest story about him in my toolkit, as told by our mom, had to do with a foul odor that grew day by day in their 5th Street apartment in downtown Jersey City. When intolerable, they searched and finally discovered the offending source in a teapot in a china closet. For there Frank, all of 1 year old, had determined to save vestiges of his poop. His first 3 years were humbly lived there, but when I was 2 months old, we were off to Hackensack, out of the land of our fathers and mothers onto suburbia. As to my first personal memory of Frank, literally my first, it is of him wildly dancing in front of a tall mirror situated between our living room and dining room, in the company of delighted grandparents or aunts and uncles, unintimidated. He did this for years, originally at Mom's behest, but then for long upon his own volition, madly gyrating he could only perform with his magic mirror. Could he not see himself, he could not go on. Obviously, he had no self-image problems. While Mom and Dad slept in a pull-out couch in the living room, and Joan and Marianne in the smallest of bedrooms, Bobby, the ever-elusive manipulator and deal-maker, had his own bedroom, while Frank, Jack, Billy, and I had long been cobbled together. I was in 3rd grade and Frank in 6th when Hurricane Gloria struck. While eating cereal that morning, Frank suddenly stood up and said, "Come on, Rich, today you and I move up into the attic." This took courage, because the attic was one hell of a mess. But by the end of the day, we had it looking downright cozy. Originally, I was to sleep on a daybed couch, tucked into an alcove in the rear, one that demanded bending carefully both into and out of. But I never felt as cozy as I did that night, as the rain pummeled brilliantly on the uninsulated roof with the nail heads exposed, about 1.5 feet above. It was October, and soon we would need to reconcile ourselves to the no heat and no insulation back when winters were always winter, and later still to the heat of summer. But it came with space, freedom, and a Christmas tree that would still be fresh when we tossed it out in April when prepping for Easter. In winter, having learned that washing our hair the night before gave way to an ice scalp in the morning, we survived via mountains of blankets alone. On our first Christmas Eve there, we introduced what became the custom of having live trees in every bedroom, and Frank dumped more candy on top of me than I had ever garnered on any Halloween, but better yet, only the kind I loved, for if it ain't chocolate, it ain't candy. Above all else, that attic was where our bond and belonging was forever forged. Got to talk about his paper route, because what he did with it was a harbinger as to just how fiercely he would tackle everything in life. He unimaginably grew it from a 45 customer route to a more than 200 customer route, winning every prize the Bergen record offered, while giving him a ridiculous workload. He was rewarded with the likes of trips to a Yankee game and a visit to the clubhouse where he met Whitey Ford and Yogi Berra, and to lunch with the Three Stooges, or with Paladin, Paladin, where do you roam? Or to Gracie Mansion with the mayor of New York City. The first year that he was flush with cash from his route, Joan, Bobby, and I made the cutoff. Went with him to buy our very first live Christmas tree. I remember it as magical. I can still see the tree lot on Main Street with the bright lights, the roaring fire, the hot cider, and the dulcet tones of Bing Crosby's voice. And as we carried it down the center of Old Poplar Avenue, with nary a car nor a soul to disturb, the snow began to fall. Just magical. This gift of Frank's. Can you imagine? I was Frank's helper, and especially so on collection days, which were awfully difficult. He always took care to reward me, and we would usually end up at Jack's candy store, where it was hot cocoa and some treat in winter, and a Coke and something in summer. The most memorable of all collection days to me was during a blizzard that dropped some 25 inches of snow and threatened to keep us from the wonderful world of Disney 7:30 p.m. final episode in the Legend of Davy Crockett series. At the time, I didn't realize that they were all going to die at the Alamo and that I was going to be devastated. I wasn't good with tragic endings. I had been a Boy Scout in Trinity's Troop 5 for 5 years when Frank, early in 8th grade, suddenly decides he's going to join. What I achieved in more than 3 years, he did in less than a month, winning the constant and relentless praises of all of our troop leaders. To accent the all of his making, it all looked so damn easy. 2 months in, we went to a regional jamboree. Now that's a big deal. Attended by more than 2,000 scouts from northern New Jersey and southern New York. There, the skills of all would be tested. In the end, no shit, and sure enough, Frank is adorned with ribbons and medals and named the champion and best scout, leaving the celebrated Eagle Scouts, who may have been at it for 8 years or more, in his dust. Perfect in every category, from camping skills to signaling and Morse code to forestry, etc., etc., perfect. Oh, what a show-off and force. To the dismay of our leaders, a month later, having conquered all, he just as abruptly moved on. When he got his working papers and said, "I have to get a job," I said, "I can get one for you." For I was tight with John Gray, the manager of the larger-than-life store, or mall before the malls, are Packards, in 8th grade at the time. I did the grocery shopping for the nuns in the convent every Friday during school hours, where I went to the manager and never a cashier. In any event, I introduced Frank to John Gray, who hired him on the spot, where he went on to pave the way for the legendary Fritzky clans belonging to Packards and its sawdusted floors. Now this is extraordinary to me, even now, for at Crater Lake, Frank had no problem letting his little brothers hang with his crowd. That I was all but amazes in retrospect, as few would ever have been so tolerant. It was a trait he passed down to all of us. I recall I know this is silly, but I recall a great pair of cut-off jeans and a red shirt of his that I liberally used during the early weeks of the summer of '66, when he could only get up there on weekends. When he realized what I had been doing, I thought I was going to understandably pay some price. But all I got was a kindly, "If you like them so much, keep them." Frank and Phil Caffrey, his great friend, traveled from the lake to Port Jervis, New York, to secure the first beer I ever drank. in a clearing in a Crater Lake forest. It'd be a lifetime before I stopped blaming what happened to me on the ginger snaps. And then in a flash, it seemed, the United States Army in Vietnam abruptly stole him from us, and the worry at 138 Poplar Avenue was both palpable and combustible, and especially so for my mom, our Rosie, for he was there during the greatest Vietnamese offensive of that abhorrently ridiculous war, the Tet Offensive of '67. But after many a close call, thank the good Lord, he was just as suddenly home again. But he came home to the betrayal of Joanne Murphy, a blessing in disguise as it paved the way for Holly, Luke, Katie, Jacqueline, and Dave. And tragically so, to the loss of our cousin David, all of 19, in the Vietnam where he had just returned from. But a few months later, and there the thoughts of why him and why not me, and so too the onslaught of a PTSD that may have silently contributed over the years to his suffering today. Safe, secure, and back in our attic with me, I was jolted awake night after night for months on end by his devastating screams and dreams. Ever and always he'd shake them off as no big deal and dismiss any feeble attempts of mine, suggesting that he might need help with it. He never did get help, at least to my knowledge, other than my feeble commiserations in the dead of night. But strong by day he went forward to bury those dreams, that monster within, and pay whatever price it demanded of him. With Bob stuck in the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, best man privileges were bestowed upon me when Frank and Holly married some 50 years ago. I remember and cherish it all, the bachelor party where Phil Caffrey's face dangerously blew up. Who knew that he was allergic to shrimp? And oh, the sun that shone so brightly upon St. Mary's, and the honor of being by their side, and the joy of that day. Mom actually got Frank his first post-Vietnam job at Frank DeLude's lithography in Hackensack, where he typically excelled and built a career in stripping film and helping to produce everything from billboards to magazine covers to playbills to greeting cards and more. When he first went to Manhattan to join the Amalgamated Lithographers of America, I was with him, and I still struggle with how it is that technology so often blows jobs, careers, etc. into oblivion, as it did with the entire lithography industry. When it went bust, Frank survived only because he also knew everything about printing. I had a friend, John Moss, who owned galvanic printing in my Meadowlands, who tried to hire Frank away from Sandy Alexander in the later years. He told me that Frank was known to be as good as it gets. By the way, when the lithographic guns were still blazing, Frank opened the door to work, even to a first full-time job, to my brother Bill, my brother-in-law Bill, my brother-in-law Pete, my brother-in-law Bob, and my friend Joe O'Connor, and oh so many others. Another Frank and Holly life-sustaining plus was our introduction by them to the wonder of Rogers Rock and Lake George, and our many camping trips there, that slice of God's heaven on earth that I referred to just last week. And when I fell with the Neisseria meningitis, he and Holly were there when I first came out of the coma for those precious 10 seconds to say, "I love you, Maggie," pushing back on the assessment that my brain was toast. And Frank was there after the fallout from the renal shock when I was told that I had end-stage renal disease. And then again, he was there when I was told that I had cancer. I did not get to as much as I would have liked. Neither the tales of my having gotten him into a fight with Joe Montesano that he did not want, nor the car that overheated on our way to Washington, D.C., and the mistake I made that led to his face being badly burned, nor did the time Tommy Herritz, Bob, and I saved him when he fell asleep with a cigarette in hand and put his bed on fire. Enveloped, we got to him in the nick of time. For years of late, I would always sit by his side at family affairs, and I'd think about our years in that attic and the rock and support and guide that he had been. And it hit me that he still saw me as a safe harbor as well, the same safe harbor that he had ever been for me. When Maggie and I finally had the chance to visit after a long COVID-19 delay recently, he sat still and frailer. Ella, his spirited granddaughter, lovingly sat by his side, and Holly was everywhere, and exuberantly so. But beyond the flashing of his trademark smile and his touch, he was, via the disease, no longer able to fully and freely express. Yet heart and soul and the very best of him were still on ready display, and memory and thanksgiving and gratitude and the wonder of brotherhood in his gentle having for so long in life been my rod and my steel, exploded within. How blessed I was to have been his roommate, to have belonged to him. But when we left, he followed Holly and Ella out. But when I rode up the ramp into the van, Frank, who had always helped Maggie tie my chair down upon visits there, softly and with concern asked Holly, "Don't I help? Shouldn't I help?" And there it was, the spark, the bright glimmer of memory and service and goodness, no matter the darkness. There the spirit that brilliantly and ever abides in him, one that will forever reach for the light. While nothing about what he lives is fair or even comprehensible, sometimes I think, via the awful grace of God, some like Frank, who have been physically drained and altered in sacrifice, have a spirit and a soul so big that it shouts out to us, as if from the mountaintop, calling upon all who knew and loved him to be warriors for the good and for grace in his name, in his honor, to be humble and relentless servants like him, to be holy like him. Holly has long called him St. Francis, and never exaggeratedly so, for that is just who and just what he is, St. Francis, as good a brother as any brother has ever known. Thanks is too small a word. That's it for now, my friends. Smile on your brothers and sisters, and if you have a mind to, say a prayer for my brother. And until the next time, take care. Have a great week.